Hello, students. Hope all of you are fine. This is your English class. Today, we are going to read unit number 7 from Oxford Reading Circle, Book 8. Students, the title of the unit is Romeo and Juliet, and this is page number 60 from your book. So, we start reading of the unit first of all and then discuss the exercises later on. The two chief families in Verona were the rich Capulists. Capulists or Capulist is the family name of the character Juliet from William Shakespeare, and the Montagues. There had been an old quarrel between these families, which was grown to such a height that it extended to the remotest kindred, to the followers and retainers of both sides, insomuch that a servant of the house of Montagues could not meet a servant of the house of Capulet, nor a Capulet encounter with a Montague by chance. But furious wars and sometimes bloodshed ensued. Ensued happened or occurred afterwards or as a result. And frequent were the brawls. Brawl, a rough or noisy fight or quarrel. From such accidental meetings, which disturbed the happy quiet of Verona's streets, old Lord Capulet made a great supper, to which many fair ladies and many noble guests were invited. All the admired beauties of Verona were present, and all were made welcome if they were not of the house of Montague. At this feast of Capulist, at this feast of Capulist, Rosaline, beloved of Romeo, son to the old Lord Montague, was present, and though it was dangerous for a Montague to be seen in this assembly, yet Benvolio, a friend of Romeo, persuaded the young lord to go in the disguise of a mask that he might see his Rosaline, and seeing her, compare her with some choice beauties of Verona, who he said would make him think his swan a crow. Romeo, for the love of Rosaline, was persuaded to go. Romeo was sincere and passionate, and one that lost his sleep for love. Benvolio wished to cure his friend of this love. To this feast then young Romeo with Benvolio and their friend Mercutio went masked. Old Capulet bid them welcome and said that he had worn a mask when he was young, and they fell to dancing, and Romeo was suddenly struck with the exceeding beauty of a lady who danced there, who seemed to him to teach the torches to burn bright, like a snowy dove trooping with crows, he said. So richly did her beauty and perfections shine above her companions. While he uttered these praises, he was overheard by Tybalt, a nephew of Lord Capulet, who knew him by his voice to be Romeo. And this Tybalt, being fiery and passionate, could not endure that a Montague should come under cover of a mask to scorn at their event. And he stormed and ragged and would have struck young Romeo dead. But his uncle, the old Lord Capulet, would not allow him to do any injury at that time. Capulet, forced to be patient against his will, restrained himself. The dancing being done, Romeo watched the place where the lady stood, and under favour of his disguise, he presumed in the gentlest manner to take her by the hand. They exchanged but a few words before the lady was called away to her mother, and Romeo discovered that the beautiful lady was young Juliet, daughter and heir to the Lord Capulet, the great enemy of the Montagues, and that he had unknowingly engaged his heart to his foe. This troubled him, but it could not dissuade him from loving. Dissuade to advise a person against something. As little rest had Juliet when she found that the gentleman that she had been talking with was Romeo and a Montague. It being midnight, Romeo departed, but unable to stay away from the house where he had left his heart. He leapt the wall of an orchard which was at the back of Juliet's house. Here he had not been long when Juliet appeared above at a window through which her exceeding beauty seemed to break like the light of the sun in the east. She, thinking herself alone, called, "O Romeo, O Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father, and refuse thy name for my sake, or if thou wilt not, be but my son love, and I no longer will be a Capulet." Romeo could no longer refrain. He bade her call him by whatever name she pleased. Juliet, alarmed to hear a man's voice in the garden, did not know who it was, but when he spoke again, she immediately knew him to be young Romeo. "How came you into this place?" said Juliet, "and by whose direction?" "Love directed me," answered Romeo. Romeo had heard from her a confession of her love. So, with an honest frankness, she confirmed the truth of what he had before heard. From this conference, she was called away by her nurse, who thought it time for her to be in bed, for it was near to daybreak. But hastily returning, she said to Romeo that if his love was indeed honorable and his purpose marriage, she would send a messenger to him tomorrow to appoint a time for their marriage. The day was breaking when they parted, and Romeo, who was too full of thoughts of that blessed meeting to allow him to sleep, instead of going home, bent his course to a monastery hard by to find Friar Lawrence. The good friar was already up at his devotions, but seeing young Romeo out so early, he guessed rightly that the cause of Romeo's wakefulness was love. A matrimonial alliance between young Juliet and Romeo might happily be the means of making up the long breach between the Capulist and the Montagues. Breach, an act of breaking or failing to observe a law, agreement, or code of conduct. And monastery is a building occupied by a community of monks living under religious vows. The old man consented to join their hands in marriage. Now was Romeo blessed indeed, and Juliet, who knew his intent from a messenger, did not fail to be early at the call at the cell of Friar Lawrence, where their hands were joined in holy marriage. The ceremony being over, Juliet hastened home. Hastened, be quick to do something. Where she stayed impatient for the coming of night, at which time Romeo promised to come and meet her. At noon, Romeo's friends Benvolio and Mercutio, walking through the streets of Verona, were met by a party of the Capulets with Tybalt at their head. He, seeing Mercutio, accused him bluntly of associating with Romeo a Montague. Mercutio, who had as much fire in him as Tybalt, replied to this accusation with some sharpness, and a quarrel began. Accusation means a charge or claim that someone has done something illegal or wrong. When Romeo himself passed that way, the furious Tybalt turned from Mercutio to Romeo and gave him the disgraceful appellation of villain. Appellation, the action of giving a name to someone or something. Romeo wished to avoid a quarrel with Tybalt because he was the kinsman of Juliet. Kinsman here means a man who is one of the person's blood relations and much beloved by her. Besides, this young Montague had never thoroughly entered into the family quarrel, being by nature wise and gentle. So he tried to reason with Tybalt, but Tybalt, who hated all Montagues as he hated hell, would hear no reason, but drew his weapon, and Mercutio, who knew not of Romeo's secret motive for desiring peace with Tybalt, provoked Tybalt, and Tybalt and Mercutio fought till Mercutio fell, receiving his death's wound. Here, provoked means stimulate or give rise to a reaction or emotion, typically a strong or unwelcome one in someone. Mercutio being dead, Romeo kept his temper no longer and they fought till Tybalt was slain. Slain, kill a person or animal in a violent way. The news of this deadly brawl quickly brought a crowd to the spot. Brawl became very hot, and among them the old lords Capulet and Montague with their wives, and soon after arrived the prince himself, who being related to Mercutio, whom Tybalt had slain, came determined to put the law in strictest force against those who should be found to be offenders. Benvolio was commanded by the prince to relate the origin of the fray. Here, fray means a fight or struggle, which he did, keeping as near the truth as he could without injury to Romeo. Lady Capulet, with extreme grief for the loss of Tybalt, exhorted the prince to do strict justice upon his murderer. Thus she pleaded against her new son in law, but she knew not yet that he was Juliet's husband. On the other hand was Lady Montague pleading for her child's life. The prince, unmoved by the passionate exclamations of these women, pronounced his sentence and banished Romeo from Verona. Here, exhorted means strongly encouraged, and banished means sent someone away from a country or place as an official punishment. When the tidings reached Juliet, she at first gave way to rage, uncontrollable anger against Romeo, who had slain her dear cousin. She called him a beautiful tyrant, a cruel and oppressive ruler, a ravenous dove, ravenous, extremely hungry, a lamb with a wolf's nature. and other contradictory names which denoted the struggles in her mind between her love and her resentment. Resentment, a feeling of anger, but in the end, love got the mastery, and the tears which she shed for grief that Romeo had slain her cousin turned to drops of joy that her husband lived. Then came fresh tears, and they were altogether of grief for Romeo's banishment. Romeo had taken refuge in Friar Lawrence's cell, where he was first made acquainted with the prince's sentence. To him, it appeared there was no living out of the sight of Juliet. Heaven was there where Juliet lived, and all beyond was torture, hell. Like a madman, he tore his hair and threw himself upon the ground to take the mire of his grave. From this unseemly state, he was roused by a message from his dear lady, which a little revived him, and then the friar took the advantage to admonish him on the unmanly weakness which he had shown. Admonish means advise or urge someone earnestly. Then, when Romeo was a little calmed, he counseled him that he should go that night and secretly take his leave of Juliet and thence proceed to Montour and there stay till the friar found fit occasion to publish his marriage, which might be a joyful means of reconciling their families. And then he did not doubt but the prince would be moved to pardon him, and he would return with 20 times more joy than he went forth with grief. Romeo was convinced convinced by these wise counsels and took his leave to go and seek his lady, proposing to stay with her that night and by daybreak pursue his journey alone to Mantua. That night Romeo passed with his dear wife. The unwelcome daybreak seemed to come too soon, and when Juliet heard the morning song of the lark, she would have persuaded herself that it was the nightingale. Romeo took his leave of his dear wife with a heavy heart, promising to write to her from Mantua every hour in the day. This was but the beginning of the tragedy. Romeo had not been gone many days before the old Lord Capulet proposed a match for Juliet, the husband he had chosen for her, not dreaming that she was married already, was Count Paris. The terrified Juliet was in a sad perplexity at her father's offer. Perplexity and entangled state. She pleaded every reason against the match but the true one, namely that she was married already. But Lord Capulet was deaf to all her excuses and ordered her to get ready, for by the following Thursday she should be married to Paris. Juliet applied to the friar, always her counselor in distress, and he asked her if she had resolution to undertake a desperate remedy. He directed her to go home and give her consent to marry Paris, and on the night before the marriage to drink of the contents of a phial. Phial, a small cylindrical glass bottle, typically used for medical samples or for potions or medicines, etc., which he then gave her, the effect of which would be that for 42 hours after drinking it, she should appear cold and lifeless, and when the bridegroom came to fetch her, he would find her to appearance dead. That then she would be buried in the family vault basement, that if she could consent to this terrible trial. In 42 hours after swallowing the liquid, she would be sure to awake as from a dream, and before she should awake, he would let her husband know, and he should come in the night and bear her to Mantua. Love gave young Juliet strength to undertake this horrible adventure. On Wednesday night, Juliet desperately swallowed the draught and became insensible. Draught, a current of cool air in a room. When young Paris came with music to awaken his bride instead of leaving Juliet, her chamber presented a dreary spectacle. What confusion then reigned through the whole house. Poor Paris lamented his bride. Juliet was born to church to swell the dreary numbers of the dead. Dreary, depressingly dull and bleak. Bad news, which always travels faster than good, now brought the story of his Juliet's death to Romeo at Mantua. Before the messenger could arrive, who was sent from Friar Lawrence to apprise him that these were mock funerals only, and that his dead lady lay in the tomb but for a short while, expecting when Romeo would come to release her from the dreary mansion. Mansion, a large, impressive house. Romeo ordered horses to be got ready, for he determined that night to see his lady in her tomb, and he called upon a poor apothecary, a person who prepared and sold medicines and drugs, apothecary who sold him a poison which, if he swallowed, would quickly dispatch him. With this poison, he set out for Verona to have a sight of his dear lady in her tomb, and then to swallow the poison and be buried by her side. He reached the churchyard at Verona at midnight and found the ancient tomb of the Capulets. He was proceeding to open the monument when he was interrupted by the young Count Paris, who had come to weep over the grave. He knew not what an interest Romeo had in the dead, but knew him to be a Montague. In an angry tone, he bade him desist, desist just stop doing something, and as a criminal condemned by the laws of Verona to die if he were found within the walls of the city, he would have apprehended him. Romeo urged Paris to leave him, but the Count refused. They fought, and Paris fell. When Romeo came to see who it was that he had slain, that it was Paris, who he learned on his way from Mantua should have married Juliet, he took the dead youth by the hand and said that he would bury him in Juliet's grave, which he now opened, and there lay his lady in her matchless beauty, and near her lay Tybalt in his bloody shroud, whom Romeo, seeing, begged pardon of his lifeless corpse. Corpse, a dead body, especially of a human being. Romeo took his last leave of his lady and swallowed the poison, whose operation was fatal. For now the hour was arrived at which the friar had promised that she should awake, and he, having learned that his letters had never reached Romeo, came himself to deliver the lady from her confinement. But he was surprised to find a light already burning in the Capulet's monument, and to see swords and blood near it, and Romeo and Paris lying breathless by the monument. Before he could conjecture conclusion how these fatal accidents had fallen out. Juliet awoke out of her trance and asked for Romeo, but the friar, hearing the noise of people coming, fled. When Juliet saw the cup closed in her true love's hand, she guessed that poison had been the cause of his end, and she would have swallowed the dregs if any had been left. She quickly unsheathed a dagger which she wore, unsheathed, unsheathed to draw from, and stabbing herself, died by her true Romeo's side. The watch by this time had come up to the place. A page had given the alarm, which had spread among the citizens. The uproar brought Lord Montague and Lord Capulet out of their beds with the prince to inquire into the causes of the disturbance. The friar had been apprehended, coming from the churchyard, trembling, signing, signing, sighing and weeping, and there, in the presence of the old Lords Montague and Capulet, he related the story of their children's fatal love. The remainder of the transactions was supplied by the page who had seen Paris and Romeo fight, and by the servant who came with Romeo from Verona. And the prince, turning to these old lords Montague and Capulet, rebuked them for their irrational enmities and showed them what a scourge heaven had laid upon such offences, that if it had found means, even through the love of their children, to punish their unnatural hate. And these old rivals agreed to bury their long strife in their children's graves. Now come to the exercises. A questions. 1. What shape did the feud between the two families of Verona take? Answer is, the quarrel between the two families had gone to such an extent that it extended to the remotest relative, to the followers and retainer of both sides, so much so that if even a servant of the Capulets met a servant of the Montagues, hot words were exchanged and sometimes even blood was shed. 2. What was Romeo's purpose in going to the masked ball? Answer is, Romeo went to the ball to meet his beloved Rosaline, and at the behest of his friend Benvolio to compare her with other beauties of Verona. 3. What mention is made of swans, doves, and crows in the early part of the tale? In what way do they serve to illustrate a point? Answer is, Benvolio pursues Romeo to go to the feast of the Capulets, saying he would find such beautiful ladies there that his own beloved, who he thought was very beautiful, would appear like a crow in comparison with the swans. When Romeo looks at Juliet, he calls her a snowy dove as compared with the other women, the crows. The words used are appropriate as they actually make it very clear that Romeo finds Juliet even more beautiful than the swans, the most beautiful women. 4. How did Romeo come to the banished from Verona? Answer is, on the day of Romeo's marriage to Juliet, Romeo and his friends were met by a party of Capulets, and after an exchange of sharp words, a quarrel started in which Tybalt killed Mercutio, Romeo's friend. Then, to avenge his death, Romeo killed Tybalt. Romeo was therefore banished from Verona. 5. In what details did Friar Lawrence's plan go wrong? Answer is the friar's plan went wrong because the letters he had sent to Romeo explaining the plan never reached him. When Romeo went to Juliet's tomb and saw her lying as if dead, he consumed poison. 6. Why did Juliet take her own life? Answer is Juliet took her own life because she believed that Romeo was dead. How did the choices of the following characters affect the outcome of the play? Discuss. A. Romeo. Romeo influenced her decision because Romeo had killed himself first because he did not want to live without Juliet. B. Tybalt. Tybalt killed Romeo's friend and Romeo killed him in revenge. After that, Romeo is banished from Verona and it announced that he would be killed if he returns. C. Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence is the one who advises about using the sleeping potion to fake Juliet's death. 7. Do you think the Capulets and Montagues had to pay too heavy a price for their enmity? Answer is yes. Both the families paid a heavy price for their enmity because both lost their loved ones. The Capulets lost Tybalt and Juliet, and the Montagues lost Romeo and Mercutio. 8. What lesson do you think this play can teach us? Answer is the play can teach us about the dangers of carrying on fights needlessly. It is better to forgive one another and live in harmony and peace. B. Reference to context. Read these lines from the story, then answer the questions. 1. And he stormed and raged and would have struck young Romeo dead. But his uncle, the old Lord Capulet, would not allow him to do any injury at that time. A. When does this incident take place and who stormed and raged at this time? Answer is Tablet. Tablet, a nephew of Lord Capulet, stormed and raged when he heard Romeo praise the beauty of Juliet, calling her a swan amongst crows, and thought that he was making fun of them at their event, having come there in disguise. B. What gave old Lord Capulet the authority to control the situation? Answer is Lord Capulet was the host of the event and so had the authority to control the situation. C. Was the person who stormed and raged restrained for long? Answer is no, not for more than a couple of days. 2. She called him a beautiful tyrant, a ravenous dove, a lamb with a wolf's nature, and other like contradictory names. A. Who called whom these names and when? Answer is Juliet called Romeo these names when she found that Tablet was killed at the hands of Romeo. B. What promoted the speaker to use such terms? Answer is she used such terms due to the struggle in her mind between her love for Romeo and her anger at his death, at his deed. C. How did the speaker reconcile her feelings shortly after this? Answer is soon her tears of grief over the death of her cousin turned to tears of joy that her husband was alive. 3. Before he could conjecture how these fatal accidents had fallen out, Juliet awoke out of her trance. A. Who was trying to work out how these accidents had taken place? Answer is Friar Lawrence. B. What were the accidents? Answer is he saw the bodies of Romeo and Paris lying dead next to the monument where Juliet was buried. Romeo had killed Paris and then drunk poison. C. What did Juliet do immediately afterwards and what did the man do? Answer is Juliet stabbed herself with a dagger that she was wearing and died by Romeo's side. The friar fled from there. C. Who is a Capulet and who is Montague? Capulet, tablet is Capulet, the nurse is Capulet, Paris is Capulet, Mercutio, Montague, Benvolio, Montague, Romeo, Montague, Rosalind, Capulet, the Prince, Montague, Juliet, Capulet. D. Words and meaning. 1. Use alternative phrases of your own in place of the italicized words. A. While he uttered these phrases, he was overheard by Tybalt, who knew him by his voice to be Romeo. While he uttered these phrases, he was overheard by Tybalt, who recognized him by his voice to be Romeo. B. He could not endure that a Montague should come under cover of a mask. He could not bear that a Montague should come in disguise. C. Romeo had unknowingly engaged his heart to his foe. Romeo had unknowingly fallen in love with his foe. D. Instead of going home, Romeo bent his course to a monastery hard by to find Friar Lawrence. Instead of going home, Romeo changed his direction to a monastery nearby. E. Lady Capulet exhorted the prince to do strict justice upon his murderer. Lady Capulet urged the prince to give a harsh and just punishment to his murderer. F. Therefore, in an angry tone, he bade him desist. Therefore, in an angry tone, he told him to stop. 2. How are the following words used in the story? Find an alternative meaning different from that used in the story for each. A. Fra, fra, tutor. B. Retainer, fee or payment. C. Draft, breeze. D. Brawl, cook on a rack. E. Fiery, bright red. F. Perfections, the process of perfecting something.